Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Let's start with Green Bay 38, San Francisco 10. So, I mean, you knew it was trouble. Bosa out, Brock Purdy out, Trent out. But as I was watching this, it was more than that. Because, I mean, Green Bay gave them opportunities. I think you have to have a hard look in the mirror. And it's hard in the NFL when you still have really good people in the locker room. I think this franchise needs a complete reboot. If you look at the Detroits, the Green Bays, Buffalo, Kansas City, the Chargers are up and coming. San Francisco is like an old fighter, John. They're like an old boxer. Last year, they were hanging on, had one last good fight. Stop drafting receivers, rebuild the O-lines and D-lines. Bosa's hurt, Kittle's hurt, McCaffrey's hurt. You know this organization well, but listen, Green Bay was going to win this game. You could tell 2 series in. I think San Francisco has to hyper-aggressively reboot the franchise.
Well, it's tough when you're paying all these guys all this money. They've recently invested. I think the best thing that could happen to them, because they're not making the playoffs, keep losing these games. I said it, today was not a great day for Dallas. Like, they're not going to the playoffs. You win, it ruins your draft position. If you're the 49ers, you want to be drafting 7th, not 15th, right? Because we know quarterbacks usually go, and that gives you an opportunity to get one of the best players on the board. They play Buffalo next week. That's a loss. The Rams, they still play the Cardinals. Like, they could lose these games, and I would imagine they do. So, I mean, I think you're looking at best a 7-win team. And I think right now, not winning maybe one more game the rest of the season. This Purdy thing, it was well reported today. Like, they're not even sure what's going on. Bosa hurt one hip, then he hurt another. Trent's just a weathered, older player. This team, you know what they need? They kind of need to get bounced in the first round. Or, I mean, not even make it to the first round of the playoffs and get extra time off and get to reset. It happened to the Warriors. Remember, they had 2020 was really rough couple years. Then they were fresh, then they won a championship.
Well, remember, the Niners' last Super Bowl loss went
Terrible.
6-10, were injury ravaged.
So to me, the best, easiest way for them to get players, they're not going to have a lot of cap space because of all the big cap, hits they have with players, is to have like the 8th pick in the draft. Because it's not just the first round, it's every round. And they've proven to be able to draft really well in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. When you're drafting in the top 10, there aren't really many excuses to miss like when they're drafting in the late 20s. So I think the best case scenario, roll out the team they're rolling out, and their schedule's hard. I mean, they still play the Dolphins, who look good right now. Obviously, they got the Bills next week. They're just going to naturally lose a lot of games, which I think is really going to benefit them long term.
Well, it's interesting. I was watching Caleb Williams today, who was he's such a talented guy. Bo Nix looks fantastic. Jaden Daniels has hit the Cliff Kingsbury wall, around Thanksgiving. Even in college, his teams tended to swoon late. And I look at Brock Purdy. They're going to keep him, right? I mean, you can't pay him $50 million, but they're going to broker a deal here, probably in the 40s.
Do they have to, though, Colin?
Why
are we always in such a rush? Like, he's not struggling to put food on the table. He's making millions of dollars off the field. It's an incredible spot for him with Kyle. If you win 6 or 7 games, and listen, this hasn't been his fault necessarily, but why are we in a rush to spend $50 million when clearly, there are 4 or 5 guys in the league that you feel really good about it, and then the next 5 guys making that much money are somewhat of a roller coaster? I would have no problem giving him that. I don't know, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, 80, 90, and everyone's like, well, he'll never take that. Well, then we won't do a deal. If he would have got me back to the NFC Championship game this year, you wouldn't have had a choice, but they're not sniffing the playoffs. He's injured now. We're playing it out. Like, the problem with Dallas playing it out is you knew how it was going to play out. Why can't we just take a deep breath and see what happens? Like, where is he going? What's the better situation? Who's lining up? One, he's not a free agent, but who's lining up on the open market to give him, let's just say, $150 million a year? Who are you bidding against? So they regret the IU contract. They have to. If they could do that over again, they would have traded him before the draft. I mean, 100%. There's not even. So let's take a deep breath. Let's just play it out. And that's what I would say most of my life, up until the last 4 or 5 years, that's usually how business used to happen. Unless your name was like Peyton Manning or LaDainian Tomlinson or some like all-time great player. Most players usually had to fight for their cash. And now just because the league's flush with it, we just give it away. And again, I have no problem giving it to the elite guys. Hell, Trent Williams, you need a boost, I'll give you a boost. Brock Purdy, like, let's just take a deep breath, everybody. And that's been my stance all along is what was the rush to pay Trevor Lawrence? Does any team regret a contract more than the Jags, like 5 weeks into the contract? At least Tua has proven, like, but again, Tua's not making $200+ million.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
and the Purdy thing was being talked about. Well, it's the Trevor Lawrence, and it's like, well, if I'd give him $140 million right now, but that's not what the ballpark that has been discussed.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big decision. I'd peel off some of the players. I would have moved off Debo last year. I wouldn't have paid Ayuk. I think they've been a little negligent on the offensive line. They've attacked the defensive line. I think they've been a bit negligent on the offensive line.
Colin, they're not negligent. They've been Kyle and the offensive line coach have been open about their philosophical belief of skill players are more important than offensive linemen. They believe in that zone scheme that I can take mainly average guys. Obviously, Trent is their outlier. But how'd they get Trent? They got him for a third-round pick, right? And the only reason he didn't go to Minnesota, who was offering way more, is he refused to go there because he wanted to play for his guy Kyle. So they've openly said, yeah, we don't take offensive linemen if we believe a skill guy is on the board higher. The football I was around growing up, with Coach Hill, who came from Belichick, and then Andy Reid and Howie Roseman, they would laugh at that. They would take offensive linemen in the first round, and then they take them again in the second round.
Well, the Texans should have attacked the offensive line, not Stephon Diggs. And by the way, Jim Harbaugh had a choice. He took Joe Alt over. I was told he wanted Brian Thomas, the kid from LSU. So, I mean, I think you can find receivers anywhere. I think it's very hard to find elite tackles out of the first round. Okay, Cowboys beat Washington 34-26. Complete batshit crazy in the fourth quarter. Just a wild game, and I'm sure you either watched it, folks, or not.
40 points in the fourth quarter or something.
It was insane. So Cliff Kingsbury always had a reputation. Jaden Daniels, I was looking at this. With 5 minutes left, Jaden Daniels had less than 100 yards passing, and Washington had 9 points against the 31st scoring defense. So it was a lot of points late, but Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix has completely surpassed Jaden Daniels for Offensive Rookie of the Year. Like, it's not close. I mean, he's the last 6 games. It's not close. Bo Nix looks confident, accurate, poised, athletic. Jaden's lost his fastball. And so, I talked to Steve Keim. I said, can you explain the Cliff Kingsbury college and professional swoon in the second half of the season? And Steve just said he's a very smart, creative guy who works in the summer to come in with new stuff. And maybe the league catches up with him, that he doesn't pivot to the second pitch after he's brought in new stuff. But Steve didn't really have an answer. But, he said hardworking, clever, smart. He does come in every year with new stuff. But I was sitting there watching that thing today. And by the way, Washington almost pulled it off. But and once again, Washington missed PATs. They missed a field goal. Special teams in this league I don't remember a year that special teams decided more football games. They're just terrible. But I looked at this and I thought to myself, today, if you could redraft all the quarterbacks, and you have to consider Sean Payton and the Bo Nix deal, if you could redraft the quarterbacks, would you draft them differently? Forget the teams. Would you redraft them differently?
I think Caleb's at least quieted. And I was starting to wonder, what the hell are we watching? These last 2 weeks make you feel a lot better. Yeah. I mean, today he made throws where you're like, that's what a number 1 overall pick looks like. No disputing. Here's where I will defend Jaden Daniels. Because today he was running around pretty well. I came into the season. I know you picked him to make the playoffs. I thought this was more like a 6 or 7 win team. It was going to be an impressive operation, but wins-loss were not going to be what it looked like they were going to be 3 weeks ago. I don't think they're that talented, Colin. I honestly, I don't think their team's that good. And their offensive line,
Terry McLaurin
is good. Yeah. Their running back's getting banged up. Brian Robinson's a good player, but he was in and out. So if they're not running the ball well, and here's the one thing, and I
Yeah.
always thought this about Chip Kelly and, Mike Leach never came to the NFL, but Cliff's a good example. These spread offenses, right, early on in the season, rapid fire, defenses aren't as dialed, take advantage of it. As the season goes on, weather changes a little bit, it gets a lot more physical. Well, what Dallas happened today? Parsons is back now. Like their defense is a little bit more, I would say, legitimate
Yeah.
with him in the game.
Yeah.
And they were just ready for a brawl. Like they got pride. I mean, they got a lot of high paid guys.
And Cooper Rush is accurate,
For
moves
sure.
the
And it was a
ball.
physical game. And I think sometimes the more
Yeah.
physical you are with more of the quote unquote spread offenses, you can shove them around a little bit. And I think that's really what's happened in my opinion. Now, one stat I saw on the Denver game is Bo Nix hasn't turned the ball over in 14 quarters. One pass was on a Hail Mary, but Jaden Daniels had 3 picks today, right? So it's like
Yeah.
you start turning the ball over, you start forcing things, games are a little closer. The other thing is in the NFL, regardless of records, I've always thought, as the season goes on, like where do you get a lot of upsets in the NFL are division games in November and December with a good team versus a bad team. We see it every year. Like today,
Yeah.
who in their right mind would have given Dallas a shot? But you could tell halfway through, you're like, this is a real game. This is going to be tough. And you got a rookie quarterback, and all of a
Well,
sudden
the
you get tight.
Titans played great. Yeah. No, I think when I looked at that game, I'm like, oh, Dallas just screwed up your draft spot. Yeah, I think to your point, I think we have to take a deep breath. Washington replaced everybody. They came in with a new quarterback and a new offense, and Cliff Kingsbury's history of starting the first 6 to 8 weeks quickly, but then eventually regression to the mean.